For one strange second, nobody moved. The lab felt colder than it had a moment ago, the kind of cold that came from polished glass, overworked air conditioning, and a silence too sharp to be accidental. Ethan Whitmore stood near the illuminated platform with his hand still in his pocket, but something in his face had changed. It was small, almost elegant, the slightest tightening near his jaw, the faint pause of a man who had expected obedience and received precision instead. Claire Benson, the company's patent counsel, lowered the tablet she had been holding against her chest and looked from Ethan to Naomi with a focus that had nothing to do with office gossip and everything to do with risk. Marcus Reed, head of research and development, shifted his weight so quickly that the leather sole of his shoe gave a soft squeak against the floor. Naomi noticed that sound. She noticed everything. The blue glow from the display case washed over the front of her gray work shirt. A bead of clean water slid from the edge of her mop and tapped the concrete near her sneaker. Somewhere behind the glass walls, an elevator bell chimed on another floor, distant and oddly ordinary, as if the building had not just tilted half an inch off its axis. Ethan let out a short breath through his nose, almost amused again, but not quite. Filed the continuation, he repeated, his tone measured now, careful in a way it had not been before. That is a very specific phrase. Naomi did not answer right away. She rested both hands on the mop handle and met his eyes with the same calm she had worn from the start. It is also the right phrase, she said. Nobody laughed this time. Claire stepped closer to the prototype display and squinted at the etched plate near the base. The patent number was barely visible beneath the company insignia, so small it looked decorative unless you knew what it meant. She raised her tablet, typed quickly, then stopped. "Ethan," she said, not loudly, but with enough weight that every head in the room turned toward her. "I need to verify something." He held out one hand, as if to keep control of the room by controlling the tempo. "Then verify it." His voice was smooth again, though the effort behind it showed. Claire did not speak for several seconds. Her eyes moved across the screen line by line. Marcus leaned in too fast, then caught himself and stepped back as if he had touched a hot stove. Naomi saw the color drain from his face before anyone else did. Ethan saw it a heartbeat later. "Marcus," he said. The question was light. The air around it was not. Marcus adjusted his tie, though it did not need adjusting. "There are a lot of filings on this family of patents," he said. "Old ones. Updated ones. Assignments. It could be any number of things." Naomi looked at him then, really looked, and memory flickered behind her eyes like a light under a door. The conference rooms after midnight. The whiteboard equations. The long weekends no one paid for. The day her keycard stopped working. Ray Coleman appeared near the back hallway entrance carrying a fresh case of bottled water, then stopped when he sensed the tension in the room. He glanced at Naomi and said quietly, "You okay, Miss Carter?" The word "miss" floated across the silence like a dropped pin. Ethan turned. So did Claire. And suddenly the name on the screen did not feel far away at all. Naomi gave Ray the faintest nod, but it was Ethan who answered first. "Miss Carter," he said, turning fully now, his polished calm thinning at the edges. Ray froze with the case of water still braced against his hip. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with silver at his temples and the careful posture of someone who had spent years learning when to speak and when to survive by silence. "That is what I call her, sir," he said at last. "Because that is her name." No one missed the plainness of it. No one missed the fact that he said it to the executive who had just treated her like part of the cleaning equipment. Claire's fingers moved again across the tablet, quick and precise, the reflected light turning her glasses into pale mirrors. "I found the continuation filing," she said. The room shifted toward her voice as if pulled by a wire. Ethan took one step closer. Marcus did not. He stayed exactly where he was, shoulders a little too rigid, mouth set in that brittle line people wore when they wanted very badly to appear uninvolved. Claire kept reading, her expression, flattening into the kind of professionalism that usually meant trouble, had already gone beyond embarrassment and entered the legal category. "Original application filed 9 years ago," she said. "Thermal transfer lattice, adaptive coating matrix, energy retention efficiency significantly above market standard at the time." Naomi lowered her eyes for a second, not in submission, but because hearing the language out loud after so many years felt stranger than she had expected. It sounded clinical now, stripped clean of the life she remembered inside it. She remembered coffee gone cold beside a stack of lab notebooks. She remembered fluorescent lights humming after midnight. She remembered a windowless research room where winter passed unnoticed because no one left before dark. She remembered calculating failure rates on a whiteboard while her mother texted from a dialysis waiting room 40 miles away, asking if she had eaten dinner. She had not. Most nights, she had not. Claire stopped scrolling. The pause that followed was soft, but it hit harder than any raised voice. Inventor listed on the continuation, she said carefully. Naomi Elise Carter. The name did not echo, yet somehow it seemed to fill every inch of the lab. Ethan's face lost the easy confidence it had worn like polished chrome. He looked at the screen, then at Naomi, then back again, as though repetition might somehow rearrange the facts into something more comfortable. Marcus finally stepped in. There were hundreds of contributors on early material science work, he said too quickly. Patent structures are complicated. Names remain on things for technical reasons all the time. Naomi lifted her gaze to him then, and there was no anger in it, which made it harder to bear. Not on continuations, she said. Her voice stayed even, almost gentle. Not unless the underlying claims survive. Claire did not contradict her. That silence said more than agreement could have. Through the glass wall, the late morning sun shifted behind a bank of clouds, and the bright silver prototype on the pedestal seemed to dull by a shade. Ethan stared at it as if seeing it for the first time, not as a product launch, not as a line item, not as a triumph he could sell, but as an object with a history he had never bothered to ask about. Naomi rested one palm lightly on the cool metal handle of her mop bucket. The wheels were still damp. A lemon-clean scent rose softly from the water below. She stood in her work shoes, her gray shirt, her janitor's badge, and somehow the room no longer made her look small. It made everyone else look unprepared. Marcus let out a thin breath and reached for certainty the way some men reached for a handrail in the dark. That does not prove current ownership, he said, smoothing the front of his suit jacket with fingers that were almost steady. People leave. Companies evolve. Titles change. This is not a museum. Claire did not look up from the tablet. Nobody said ownership, she replied. We are discussing inventorship. The distinction landed with the quiet force of a locked door. Ethan remained still beside the pedestal, close enough now that the white light beneath the prototype caught along the cuff of his shirt and the edge of his watch. Just 10 minutes earlier, he had been guiding the room through launch language, market confidence, investor appetite, all the polished phrases that made innovation sound clean and inevitable. Now the object behind the glass seemed to have acquired weight. History. Debt. Naomi could feel the shift in the room the way people felt weather in their knees before a storm. Nobody was pretending anymore. Even the younger associates had stopped performing attention and started paying it. Claire turned the tablet so only Ethan could see for a moment, then angled it back toward herself. The continuation was not accidental, she said. The claims survive because the core architecture survived. Her name is not here out of courtesy. It is here because the filing chain recognizes substantive contribution. Ethan's eyes moved once more to Naomi. He did not speak immediately, and for the first time that morning the silence around him was not obedience. It was calculation. Naomi stood with one hand resting lightly on the handle of the mop bucket, her badge still clipped at her chest, the plastic corner faintly scratched from years of swiping into side doors and service hallways. She could hear the soft spin of the ventilation system overhead. She could smell floor polish, coffee, and that faint hot dust scent expensive machines gave off under display lights. It was strange what the body noticed when the past stepped into the room uninvited. Marcus forced a dry laugh that did not belong to anyone relaxed. Naomi, right? If you had concerns, there were channels. Naomi looked at him with a calm so complete it made his voice sound louder than it was. There were, she said. I used them. A flicker crossed Claire's face. Ethan caught it. What does that mean? He asked. Naomi let the question hang for one beat before answering. It means I sent memos. I requested review. I documented revisions. I asked for meetings that never happened. She spoke without heat, and that somehow made the words sharper. Then my mother got sicker. My contract ended. My access disappeared. Ray set the case of bottled water down by the wall with more care than necessary, as if any sudden noise might crack whatever was holding the room together. Ethan glanced toward Marcus. Did you know her? He asked. Marcus hesitated, and in corporate rooms hesitation was often confession before language caught up. I knew of the team structure at the time, he said. It was years ago. Naomi's gaze drifted past him, not dismissive, just tired in a way that had been earned long before this morning. She remembered those years in fragments that still carried temperature. Lab benches cold under her forearms. Winter rain streaking the parking deck windows at 11:40 at night. A gas station coffee 2 exits from home because she was too exhausted to trust herself to drive without stopping. Her mother asleep in a recliner with a blanket over her knees and a paper hospital bracelet still around one wrist. Naomi had not spoken about any of that in a long time. She had learned that pain became easier for other people to manage once it was invisible. Ethan studied her face as though trying to locate the version of her he had missed, and realizing too late that he had never looked long enough to find it. Then Claire scrolled farther down the file, and her expression changed again, this time not to recognition but concern. Ethan, she said quietly, there is something else you need to see. Claire turned the tablet fully toward Ethan, but Naomi saw the change in his face before she saw the screen. It was not confusion this time. It was the sharper thing that came after confusion, the moment a person realized the problem was no longer awkward, no longer social, no longer something a polished smile could smooth over. Before lunch, the blue-white light from the display platform washed across his features and made him look older than he had 10 minutes earlier. Say it, he said quietly. Claire drew in a measured breath. The royalty ledger attached to the continuation history is incomplete, she said. There are notices here, internal flags, unresolved transfer questions. If this chain is clean, the documentation is not showing it. And if it is not clean, then we may be presenting technology this morning that is tied to unaddressed compensation and attribution issues. Nobody in the room moved. Even the air seemed to hold itself still. Marcus looked down first, which in a room like this was as close to panic as some people ever allowed themselves to show. Naomi did not step forward. She did not need to. The truth had finally begun doing its own walking. Ethan took the tablet from Claire and read in silence, his thumb frozen along the edge of the case. Naomi watched the muscles in his jaw shift once. The prototype behind the glass stood bright and elegant on its pedestal, all brushed metal and reflected light, but the illusion around it had started to crack. It was no longer just a product. It was a record. Naomi could almost smell the old lab again, the stale coffee, the dry heat from overworked machines, the faint marker ink from equations written and erased and written again. She remembered nights when the windows were black and the security lights in the parking lot made everything outside look like another planet. She remembered sending draft after draft with revision notes no one answered for weeks. She remembered one meeting where her slide deck had been used without her name on it, and the way the room had continued as though that were ordinary. Then her mother's treatments got worse. The drives to the dialysis center got longer. Bills stacked up in careful little piles on the kitchen table beside pharmacy receipts and unopened envelopes she was too tired to sort. Naomi had chosen survival one day at a time, and survival did not leave much room for indignation. It only asked what could be paid before Friday and whether the gas tank would make it through the week. Ray stood near the wall now with his broad hands folded in front of him, his eyes lowered out of respect, not shame. He had met Naomi 2 years earlier on the overnight facilities crew when she arrived for training in shoes that had already been resold twice and thanked every person in the room like she meant it. He had never asked why someone with her quiet precision cleaned offices after midnight. He had only noticed that she read things before she threw them away, that she corrected grammar on forms no one else bothered to read, that she spoke with the stillness of somebody who had once been heard and then had not. Ethan finally lifted his gaze. "Were you ever paid for this?" he asked. The question sounded smaller than it should have, stripped of title and authority, almost human in its lateness. Naomi looked at the patent number etched beneath the glass, and then back at him. "Not in the ways that mattered," she said. Her voice did not rise. It did not break. It simply settled into the room like dust in a shaft of light, impossible to ignore once seen. Claire took the tablet back and scrolled farther, her eyes narrowing. "There is an archived internal memo," she said. "Recommendation for inventor reconciliation. It was never completed." She looked up slowly, directly at Marcus now, and it was marked reviewed. Marcus did not answer at once, and that silence told its own story. It was not the silence of innocence searching for the right wording. It was the silence of a man racing through old decisions, old emails, old rooms with closed doors, trying to remember which version of the past might still protect him. The overhead lights hummed softly above the glass walls. Somewhere down the hall, a copier started and stopped. The ordinary sounds of the building went on as if this floor had not just opened a sealed compartment of its own history. Claire held the tablet steady in both hands, her posture precise, her voice level. The memo is dated 6 years ago, she said. It recommends a full reconciliation of inventor credit, deferred compensation review, and legal notification before any commercial expansion of the patent family. Ethan did not take his eyes off Marcus. Reviewed by whom? Claire glanced once more at the screen, though she already knew. Marcus Reed. His name landed heavier than Naomi expected, perhaps because part of her had spent years teaching herself not to expect the record to remember anything correctly. Marcus swallowed and adjusted his tie again, though by now the gesture had begun to look less like professionalism and more like refuge. Those reviews were administrative, he said. There were staffing changes, budget constraints, legal bottlenecks. People move on. Files stall. Naomi listened without blinking. She had heard versions of that language before, words that made abandonment sound procedural, words that turned human choices into weather. Ethan finally looked at her again. Whatever he meant to say did not come quickly. She could see the shift in him now, the uncomfortable arrival of perspective. The janitor he had dismissed in front of his team was standing 4 feet away from a product launch because her work had never truly left the building. She had only been removed from the light around it. Naomi remembered the day her access badge stopped opening the research wing door. There had been no meeting, no explanation worth repeating, only a polite email from Human Resources and a voicemail from a billing office reminding her that her mother's next treatment required a copay she did not yet have. She had packed a banker's box with notebooks, 2 framed certificates, and a mug with a chipped handle. Outside, the parking deck had smelled like wet concrete and August heat. She had sat in her car for 11 minutes with both hands on the steering wheel, not crying, not speaking, just staring through the windshield while people in better suits walked past without seeing her. Ray had never known that part. None of them had. To this building, reinvention had been simple. To Naomi, it had been rent, night shifts, and the quiet humiliation of cleaning conference rooms where people still used ideas that had once kept her awake until 2 in the morning. Why was it never completed? Ethan asked. The question was directed at Marcus, but the room felt like it was asking something larger. Marcus glanced toward the glass case, toward Claire, toward the younger staff gathered in stillness around the edge of the lab. His confidence had not vanished all at once. It was draining, measured, and visible, like color leaving a photograph in sunlight. Because at the time, he said carefully, leadership believed it was cleaner to consolidate the narrative. Claire's expression hardened by a degree. Ethan's did too, though his change was quieter. Naomi heard the word narrative and felt something cold pass through her chest. Not grief. Recognition. They had not lost her work. They had simplified her out of it. And somehow that truth hurt more than being forgotten ever had. The word hung in the lab long after Marcus stopped speaking. Narrative. Not science. Not inventorship. Not contribution. Narrative. Naomi felt it settle over the room like a fine layer of dust, thin but impossible to ignore once it caught the light. The prototype still glowed inside its glass case, elegant and expensive, but now it looked less like progress and more like evidence. Ethan Whitmore turned away from Marcus and faced the display for a moment, his reflection staring back at him from the polished surface, distorted by the soft blue light beneath the machine. Naomi watched him in silence. She had spent enough years around powerful people to recognize the exact moment comfort left them. It was never loud. It was subtle, almost private. A tightening in the shoulders. A pause before the next breath. The realization that the room no longer moved in the direction of their confidence. Claire set the tablet against the edge of the pedestal and folded her arms. Cleaner for whom? She asked. Marcus opened his mouth, but no answer came right away. The younger staff near the back wall stood frozen with the careful stillness of people who understood that whatever happened next would be repeated in elevators, in parking garages, over cocktails, and in every future meeting where trust was expected but not guaranteed. Ray looked at Naomi once, briefly, then lowered his gaze again, giving her the dignity of not making a spectacle out of what had already cost her enough. Naomi appreciated that more than she could say. Ethan finally spoke, but the edge in his voice was gone. "Did anyone tell her?" he asked. Claire did not need clarification. "Not according to the file," she said. "There is no record of notification, no completed reconciliation, and no signed waiver attached to the unresolved memo." Naomi let out a breath, so soft only she heard it. For years, she had wondered whether she had missed something, some hidden form, some buried policy, some technical reason the silence around her had been justified. There was a kind of cruelty in uncertainty. It made people accuse themselves in private. It made them replay old decisions until memory wore thin. Now, standing in a lab she had once helped imagine, with a mop bucket beside her and lemon cleaner still clinging to the air, she felt that old uncertainty begin to loosen. Not because it erased what had happened. It did not. But because the truth had shape now. It could be named. Marcus cleared his throat and tried again. "Look, the company was under pressure," he said. "There was a merger coming. Investors wanted a singular vision. Leadership did not want complexity in the story around the technology." Naomi looked at him steadily. "So you removed the people who complicated it," she said. Her tone was quiet, but every word landed. Marcus did not deny it. That was the part Ethan seemed to feel most. He turned slowly and looked at Naomi as though he was trying to reconcile the woman in the gray custodial shirt with the absence his company had built into its own history. The overhead lights reflected off the damp floor near her shoes. Her badge caught a thin glint of white. She had spent 2 years emptying trash cans on this floor after midnight, wiping fingerprints off the same conference tables where executives praised innovation in language clean enough to hide what it cost. Ethan's expression changed again, this time into something more difficult than embarrassment. It was recognition, and it arrived too late to spare him from it. "Miss Carter," he said, and this time the title sounded deliberate, almost careful. "I think we need to stop this launch." The sentence changed the room more completely than any raised voice could have. For a heartbeat, nobody reacted, as if the people gathered under the white lights needed time to understand what had just been placed at risk. A launch did not simply stop in a company like this. Schedules bent around it. Investors flew in for it. Press packets were printed for it. Caterers arrived early for it. But Ethan stood there facing the glass case with a stillness that suggested he understood something larger had already broken loose. Marcus found his voice first. "That would be a serious mistake," he said, stepping forward at last. "We have analysts downstairs, media coming in by noon, and a board update in less than 90 minutes. Ethan did not turn toward him. "And if we proceed with unresolved inventor reconciliation?" Claire asked before Marcus could keep going. "Would that be a smaller mistake?" The words cut clean through the room. Naomi felt the cool plastic grip of the mop handle under her palm and tried to steady the strange mix of sensations moving through her chest. Vindication was not the warm feeling people imagined it to be. It did not arrive like sunlight. It arrived like exhaustion finally given permission to sit down. She looked at the prototype, at the silver housing she could have sketched from memory, at the thin seam along the edge where the internal lattice sat hidden from view. Years ago she had believed this technology might help reduce energy loss in systems that overheated too fast and failed too early. She had believed in it before she learned what companies could do to belief once money entered the room. Ethan finally turned and faced the group. The expensive certainty that had framed him all morning was gone now, replaced by something more difficult and therefore more honest. "No one says a word to communications until legal gives direction," he said. "The presentation is paused. The investor demo is paused. Everything connected to this unit is paused." The younger associates exchanged quick looks, but said nothing. Claire nodded once, already typing. Marcus stared at Ethan as though he had stopped recognizing him. "You are overcorrecting," he said. "This can be managed quietly." Naomi lifted her eyes at that. Quietly. It was always that word. Quietly delayed. Quietly transferred. Quietly omitted. Quietly survived. Ethan heard it too, and this time when he looked at Marcus there was no softness in his expression at all. "That instinct is why we are here," he said. The room went still again. Naomi did not expect the sudden ache that rose behind her ribs then, not because Ethan had defended her, because he had not yet earned the right to make this feel repaired, but because someone in authority had finally named the rot instead of decorating it. Ray shifted near the wall and cleared his throat softly. Miss Carter was on this floor most nights, he said, his voice careful, respectful. She never touched anything that was not hers. Never once. She treated this place like it mattered. No one answered him, yet the simple dignity of the statement changed the air all the same. Naomi looked down for a moment at the damp shine on the concrete near her shoes. She thought of all the nights she had crossed empty hallways with a trash cart while the city glittered outside the windows and the offices smelled like toner, carpet cleaner, and expensive cologne left behind after meetings. She had not known then whether the building remembered her. Now she understood that buildings did not remember. People chose whether to. Claire stepped beside Ethan and lowered her voice, though everyone still heard. There is one more issue, she said. If Miss Carter was never properly reconciled, then any public statement about soul internal development could create exposure beyond compensation. Ethan looked at Naomi fully then, not above her, not past her, but at her. Miss Carter, he said quietly, before we take another step, I need to ask you something. Are you willing to tell us what really happened? Naomi did not answer right away. The question deserved more than the quick relief of a neat explanation, and the room, for once, seemed willing to wait. She stood beside the mop bucket in the cold white light, one hand resting on the handle, the other hanging loose at her side, and let her eyes move across the lab she had once known in a different life. The glass walls, the polished floor, the silver prototype glowing on its pedestal like something untouched by compromise. It all looked cleaner than she remembered. Back then, the work had lived in windowless rooms with dry marker dust on the ledges, takeout containers stacked near recycling bins, and legal pads filled edge to edge with numbers no one outside the team would have understood. I was hired into advanced materials 9 years ago, she said at last. Her voice stayed soft, but every person in the room leaned toward it. Junior research track. Contract position. No corner office. No title anyone remembered. Just long hours and a project that kept changing names depending on who was in the room. Claire lowered the tablet slightly, no longer typing, just listening. Ethan stood still, his attention fixed on Naomi with the uneasy concentration of someone hearing the truth too late to interrupt it. Naomi continued. The first version failed under heat stress. The lattice warped, the coating separated, and energy loss spiked after repeated cycles. We kept patching symptoms. I started working nights on the transfer behavior because it did not make sense to me. The math looked fine on paper, but the material kept behaving like it was remembering the wrong environment. Marcus looked away at that, and Naomi noticed. She noticed because he had once praised that exact sentence in a meeting and repeated it later as if it were his own. I changed the layering sequence, she said. Not the formula. The order. Microns matter when heat moves too fast. Everybody wanted a bigger breakthrough. What solved it was smaller than that. A thinner intermediate layer, adjusted timing, a different retention balance. Nothing flashy. Just correct. Ray watched her with quiet pride from near the wall. The younger associates looked stunned, not only by the science, but by how naturally it lived on her tongue, like a language she had never stopped speaking even while cleaning floors beneath it. Naomi glanced toward the prototype case and saw not a launch product, but the ghost of an old whiteboard with her handwriting across the middle and coffee rings near the corner. When the numbers improved, leadership got interested, she said. That is usually when the room changes. Before success, people ask what you need. After success, they ask who gets to stand next to it. No one moved. Even Marcus did not try to cut in. I filed my notes. I documented revisions. I sat in the early review calls. Then my mother got worse. I started leaving the lab to drive her to treatment, then coming back after, then leaving again before sunrise. I missed dinners. I missed sleep. I missed the point where people in better suits began simplifying the story. Her eyes lifted to Ethan. There was no accusation in them now, only clarity. By the time the continuation was filed, I was already being spoken about in the past tense while I was still in the building. The words settled into the lab with a weight no spreadsheet could absorb. Claire's face tightened. Ethan exhaled slowly. Marcus stared at the floor. Naomi rested her hand more firmly on the mop handle, grounding herself in the ordinary plastic and metal of the life she had built after the one they had erased. Then she said the part that made the room feel smaller. I was not removed because I was wrong. I was removed because I was inconvenient. The room stayed quiet after Naomi spoke, but it was no longer the quiet of doubt. It was the quieter thing that came after certainty, when people realized they had crossed from misunderstanding into responsibility. Ethan Whitmore stood beside the display pedestal with the blue-white glow touching the edge of his collar. And for the first time that morning, he looked like a man standing inside a decision instead of above one. He glanced at the glass walls, at the associates frozen near the back, at Claire with the tablet still in her hands, and finally at Marcus, who had begun to look less like the head of research and development and more like someone waiting for a door to open that was not going to open. How many people knew? Ethan asked. No one answered immediately. The question moved through the room like cold air under a doorway. Claire broke the silence first. That depends on what you mean by new, she said. Knew her name was on the continuation? Probably very few. Knew the history had unresolved issues. More than that. Enough to know this should not have reached a public launch without review. Marcus let out a breath through his nose and finally looked up. You are making this sound intentional, he said. It was a layered transition. Complex projects outlast teams all the time. Naomi heard the language and felt a tired ache pass through her. Layered transition. Another neat phrase laid over an ugly fact. Ethan turned toward him fully now. Was it intentional, he asked. Marcus hesitated again, and there it was, that same fatal pause, thinner now, weaker. It was managed, he said. At the time, leadership believed it was better for the company to present a consistent face to the market. Ethan held his gaze. That is not an answer. Marcus straightened, the habit of authority rising one last time inside him. It is the only answer that matters if you want this company protected. The words landed hard. A few of the younger staff looked down, the way people did when someone had finally said aloud the rule everyone was supposed to obey without hearing. Protect the company. Protect the narrative. Protect the launch. Naomi had heard versions of that logic all her adult life. It was how hospitals explained billing. It was how landlords explained increases. It was how offices explained why some people were brilliant in private and invisible in public. Ethan looked at the prototype again. For a moment, Naomi wondered if he would do what powerful men so often did when truth became expensive. Delay. Delegate. Reframe. Move the problem into a smaller room with better soundproofing. Instead, he reached up and removed the wireless microphone clipped near the front of his shirt, the one he had been wearing for the investor presentation downstairs. The gesture was simple, but it changed something fundamental in the lab. He set the microphone on the pedestal beside the tablet, and the soft click it made against the metal surface sounded louder than it should have. No, he said. Just that. One syllable, calm and clear. Then he looked at Claire. Lock the files. Notify compliance. I want every archived memo, every internal review, every assignment trail, and every compensation record tied to this patent family preserved before noon. Claire nodded once. Ethan turned to the group gathered near the wall. The launch remains paused. If anyone downstairs asks, tell them legal review is in progress. Nothing more. Finally, he faced Naomi. The white light from the display case caught in his eyes, and whatever pride had been there before had burned down into something harder and cleaner. Miss Carter, he said quietly, I cannot undo this morning, but I am not going to bury the rest of it. Naomi held Ethan's gaze for a long moment, not because she wanted to prolong his discomfort, but because she had learned the cost of letting powerful people speak too quickly after being confronted by truth. Sometimes they mistook remorse for repair. Sometimes they offered urgency where accountability should have been. The lab remained still around them, all white light and polished glass and the faint scent of lemon cleaner rising from the bucket at her side. Claire had already begun sending messages, her fingers moving in short, precise bursts across the screen. At the far end of the room, the younger associates stood quiet as church, their faces drained of the easy detachment they had carried in with their tablets and conference badges. Marcus said nothing now. The silence around him had changed shape. It no longer felt strategic. It felt lonely. Naomi looked down at the prototype once more, at the silver shell reflecting the ceiling lights in neat lines, and she thought of all the years between then and now. Her mother's treatments, the parking garage tolls, the smell of hospital coffee that never tasted like coffee. The second-hand sedan that rattled above 50 miles an hour but kept going because it had to. The overnight shifts. The scraped knuckles from pushing cleaning carts through service doors with broken closers. The little humiliations of being overlooked by people who praised innovation while dropping half-finished lattes beside trash bins they expected someone else to empty. She had survived all of it without the luxury of bitterness because bitterness did not pay rent and did not wake up for the next shift. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. "I am not interested in watching anyone get humiliated," she said. The sentence settled into the room with a force that made several people lift their heads. Ethan did not move. Naomi continued, "That is not why I spoke up. I did not say something because I wanted this room turned upside down. I said something because truth was about to be wheeled downstairs under bright lights and sold like it had arrived here clean." Claire stopped typing. Even Ray looked up then, his expression softening with something like relief. Naomi rested both hands on the mop handle, the cool plastic grounding her. "I do not need a performance," she said. "I do not need a speech crafted by legal. I do not need to be thanked in a room only after it becomes expensive not to ignore me." Ethan lowered his eyes for one brief second, and in that small gesture Naomi saw the first honest crack in him. "What I need is simple. My work needs to be acknowledged accurately. The file needs to be corrected completely. Anyone whose name or role was buried needs to be reviewed fairly. And no one below this floor should ever again be treated like intelligence only counts when it comes in the right clothes." The last words moved through the room like a quiet bell. One of the junior engineers swallowed hard and looked down at her own reflection in the floor. Marcus shifted, as if he wanted to object, but found no language that could survive the moment. Ethan lifted his gaze again. There was no defense in it now, only the strained clarity of a man discovering that leadership began precisely where image stopped being useful. Naomi looked at him without triumph. That was the part he seemed least prepared for. She was giving him no easy villain to blame, but a harder task instead. A chance to choose decency without applause. "You asked me what really happened," she said softly. "What really happened is that people decided the future would look better if it forgot who helped build it. So do not fix this for me, Mr. Whitmore. Fix the habit that made this possible." Ethan did not answer immediately, and that pause was different from all the others that had come before it. It was not hesitation born from strategy, nor the polished delay of a man choosing language that would protect his image. It was the pause of someone standing at the edge of an old habit and realizing that stepping back into it would cost more than stepping out. The lab remained hushed around him. Claire held the tablet against her side now, waiting. Ray stood near the wall with his hands folded, steady as ever. The younger associates looked from Naomi to Ethan with the alert stillness of people watching a culture reveal itself in real time. Marcus had gone pale beneath the overhead lights. The silver prototype gleamed inside its glass case, pristine and silent, while the truth around it had become too large to fit inside any launch deck. Ethan reached for the microphone he had set down on the pedestal earlier, then stopped. His hand hovered over it for half a second before he let it fall away. When he spoke, he did so without amplification, and somehow that made every word feel more deliberate. "Claire," he said, effective immediately, "I want an external review team brought in on the patent chain, the compensation trail, and the personnel decisions connected to this program." Marcus looked up sharply. Ethan did not look back at him. "I also want full access logs recovered from the research division for the period surrounding Miss Carter's departure. And I want the board informed that this review begins today, not after the quarter, not after the press cycle, and not after anyone has time to prepare a cleaner story." The room absorbed the words in complete silence. Naomi felt something shift inside her then, not relief exactly, but the first honest sign that the truth might finally be allowed to stay standing once it entered the room. Marcus took one step forward, the last of his confidence gathering into something hard and brittle. "You cannot do this on the basis of one emotional confrontation," he said. "There are processes." Ethan turned toward him then, and his voice remained level. "Yes," he said, "that is precisely the problem. There were processes. They were used to erase someone without ever having to say her name out loud." Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, not in disagreement, but in recognition. Ethan continued, "Until this review is complete, you are removed from decision-making authority on this launch, this patent family, and any related internal communications. Marcus stared at him as though he had been struck by the unimaginable fact that consequences still existed above his pay grade. No one rushed to defend him. No one even cleared a throat. The lab had become merciless in the quiet way truth often became once enough people saw it at the same time. Naomi kept both hands on the mop handle. The plastic grip was cool and slightly worn beneath her palms. She could smell the clean citrus scent from the bucket and the faint electric warmth of the display lights. Ordinary things. Grounding things. Ethan turned back to her, and whatever was on his face now was not confidence. It was effort. Humility did not come naturally to men like him. You could see the weight of it in the way he held his shoulders, in the careful absence of performance. "Miss Carter," he said, "there is a board briefing downstairs in less than an hour. I will correct the launch status with legal present, and I will correct the development record after counsel confirms the language. But before any of that, I would like to ask you something in front of everyone here." Naomi said nothing. Ethan drew one measured breath. "When this review begins, if it is done transparently and completely, would you be willing to advise on the technical history so what was built is finally described the way it actually happened?" The question settled over the room with quiet weight. It was not an offer wrapped in charity. It was not a favor disguised as recognition. For the first time that morning, it sounded like respect. Naomi let the question rest between them for a moment, not because she wanted power from the silence, but because she had learned that some answers should only be given once the room had earned them. The lab felt different now. The cold white lights were still humming overhead. The prototype still glowed behind the glass, and the faint scent of lemon cleaner still rose from the bucket beside her, but the air no longer belonged to performance. It belonged to consequence. Naomi looked at Ethan Whitmore, then at Claire, then past them to the younger staff gathered near the wall, faces pale and attentive, tablets lowered at last. She thought of every person who had ever known something important and stayed quiet because the room had already told them what kind of voice counted. She thought of her mother in the dialysis chair with a knitted blanket over her knees, telling her in a tired but steady voice that being overlooked was not the same as being small. She thought of long hallways after midnight, office lights dimmed to half power, the soft rattle of a janitor cart, and the strange ache of wiping fingerprints off doors that had once opened for her. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm enough to carry without effort. "Yes," she said. "If the review is real, if the record is corrected completely, and if the people who were simplified out of the story are named honestly, then yes. I will help tell the technical truth." No one moved. Ethan held her gaze, and something in his face eased, not into relief, but into resolve. Naomi continued before anyone could mistake her answer for surrender. "But I will not help polish this into a redemption story. I will not stand downstairs and make the room comfortable. I will help with facts. I will help with history. I will help make sure nobody says this was built by one polished mind in one bright office. It was built by many hands, many late nights, and by people whose names were easier to leave out than to pronounce with respect." The last words settled over the lab like a final measure in a song that had been waiting all morning to end on the right note. Claire nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if some private standard had finally been met. Ray lowered his head and smiled to himself, small and quiet, the kind of smile people wore when dignity had survived longer than anyone knew. Ethan straightened, looked toward the glass wall, and then toward the elevator bank beyond it where the day's schedule was still moving without mercy. "Then that is how it will be done," he said. He picked up the microphone from the pedestal, weighed it in his hand for a second, and then set it back down again. "No," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Not with that." He turned to Claire. "Come with me. Legal first, board second, and communications after that." Then, before he took a step toward the door, he looked back at Naomi. "Miss Carter," he said, and this time there was no distance in it, only care. "I am sorry." She did not rescue him from the moment. She did not tell him it was enough. She simply gave the smallest nod, because some apologies were not doors. They were only the sound of one finally unlocking. Ethan walked out with Claire beside him, the glass door whispering shut behind them. Marcus remained where he was, diminished now by the very light that had once flattered him. The younger associates slowly drifted after the others in respectful silence until only Ray and Naomi remained in the lab. For a few seconds neither spoke. Then Naomi looked at the prototype one last time, at the reflection of her gray work shirt in the polished glass, at the patent number etched in tiny letters near the base where the truth had waited all morning to be read. She reached for the mop,